Tim Mulcrone is the last remaining charter member of the Chanhassen Rotary, founded in 1987. He served 3 times as president and on many club and district committees, 5950 and primarily 5950 committees. Since 2012, he's been the District 5950 Polio Chair. Tim always has the latest information on Rotary's flagship initiative, the worldwide eradication of polio. Tim retired from a career in law enforcement and has a passion for singing songs from the Great American Songbook. He resides with his wife Ginger in Savage, where they have been building a home on the Credit River. Please welcome Tim Mulcrone.
Thank you, Debbie. Thanks so much, Debbie. Appreciate it. It's nice to be back here with all of you. Everyone relax. I'm not here to put the touch on you, okay? Just everybody relax. In fact, for 10 years I've been doing this, and what I ask is what the presidents want from me. I'm here to support the presidents, whether it be with some literature on the table, some stickers, which some of you are wearing, a speech, and I do a variety of speeches. Last month I had a big call for doing Dracula. Dracula comes and talks about a personified polio, and it goes like this. I met polio at the conference for Especially Evil in Las Vegas last year. He was presenting on victim selection, and I was interested, and I asked him out for a drink. Well, Dracula talks all about how evil polio is, so that I do that in October, and I do another speech in March, which is a leprechaun looking for his pot of gold for polio. So whatever a president wants, that's what I'm here to deliver. And Debbie asked for the full meal deal today, so you're going to sit back and relax. Whatever decision your club makes, that's fine. That's something for you and your club board to make at a later time. My goal here today is to inform you as to our progress on the #1 effort of Rotary International, which is the worldwide eradication of polio. Something better than just getting a brochure in the mail, I hope. I know that, do you know the Rotary International spent a lot of money on a consultant to find out what was the major thing that members were looking for, and it was the club meeting experience. So I hope not to disappoint you today. We all like to have a good speaker at our meetings, and I want our journey together to be a good one. So I have many little stories for you today. A few years ago, I read a piece in Time magazine. It said, the rear guard of polio virus is being outgunned on nearly every front by Rotary International. It said it in Time magazine. Who else was in that magazine? Well, President Obama was in it, other heads of state, cinema celebrities, sports heroes. My friend said, man, we got to get the word out. I'm like, you're in Time magazine. If you look around, you actually are in the news. If you just try and Google polio Rotary in the news this last week, you'll come up with thousands of hits. So here you are. You're in league with the heads of state, rock stars, movie stars, sports heroes. You're there. You're there, baby. I see it in Rotary and Newsweek. I see it in Wall Street Journal, The Economist, Reuters, and so much of today's mainstream media. Bill Gates regularly speaks about our efforts, and you know, he put 1.2 billion of his money towards our efforts to eradicate polio. That was the first time around. About a week ago, this is news, in case you think that I don't have anything new to tell you, this is pretty current. He doubled down on that and gave another 1.2 billion commitment to end polio. And he's inspired many others, as we have. We're really the cheerleaders. We are the catalyst. We are the people that make this thing happen. And we've inspired people like former mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, gave $100 million. That's what inspiration can do. Now, a brief history about polio, since I look around the room, and I know that many of you do know, but I don't want to miss anybody who doesn't know how this all started. 1953, Dr. Salk develops a cheap and effective vaccine. 1962, Dr. Sabin develops an oral polio vaccine. Polio is a disease that affects the central nervous system and can leave you paralyzed or it can leave you dead. Affects about, I can tell you more about that, 1 in 200 are symptomatically affected. So now the world has 30 years, let's take you 30 years into the future, 1955, 1985. 1985, you'd think that after 30 years of a cheap, effective vaccine, 2 of them, that the world would be rid of polio. This is pre-Rotary. Keep an eye on that. However, in 1985, there were still 387,000 cases in 125 countries that the World Health Organization called endemic. It's an interesting term, endemic. Endemic means common, normally occurring, and expected in a given population. The World Health Organization said, this is what you can probably expect the state of polio will be. It was Rotary, it was you. It was you that said, that's crazy. That is simply a geopolitical problem that we need to solve. And we nearly have, so let's bring you up to speed today. So that we make a commitment in 1985, where are we at today? What if I told you there were, well, we've had 100,000 cases every year for 10 years, and now that's how it's going to be. No. When I started this 10 years ago, the acronym was, let's stop the pain, PAIN. Let's stop the polio in Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, and Nigeria. That was simply 10 years ago. We were down to 4 countries 10 years ago. And now today, that doesn't apply anymore because India went polio free in 2013 and Nigeria went polio free 2 years ago, which made all of Africa polio free. Give yourselves a round of applause for that. You have to give yourself a round of applause. This would not happen without you. A catalyst is a very, very important thing to be. Action doesn't happen without a catalyst. You can't make good steel without certain catalysts. We're the ones that actually make this thing happen. Even though the Global Polio Eradication Initiative has many partners, it's Rotary that is the glue that binds, they're the cheerleaders that make it happen. We're the ones that cut through all of the red tape to make it happen. So now where are we at today? No, we're not at 100,000 cases. We're not at 3 or 4 countries. We're at 2 countries where it's considered an endemic, Pakistan and Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, we only have 1 case this year. And in Pakistan, we have 20 cases. And then we have little pop-ups here and there. Mozambique's got a few cases, but they took their eye off the ball, and that's kind of the result that you're going to see. And that can be addressed quite immediately. The thing is, with this kind of success and this kind of fame, the expectations to perform become even greater. The more successful you become, think about a leading quarterback in the NFL. If they're successful, the expectations every week for them to continue to perform at that level is greater and greater. I'm not a great sports fan, but I do find some analogous thoughts there. When you're a winner, people love a winner. Don't they? Don't people love a winner? Doesn't everybody love the sports team that's winning? Okay, we're on that team right now. Rotary's on that team. Losers are easily forgotten, dismissed, and, get this, even blamed for the consequences of losing. If we lose this fight, how would you like to be a part of that? And what are the consequences of losing that fight? Many people think about, since we're this close to ending polio, we need to start thinking about the next thing. What will the next thing be? Well, if the next thing follows a failure in the Polio Eradication Initiative, what's that going to do to the next thing? The next thing has to be followed by complete eradication of polio. Why are we so concerned about polio in the Middle East? Well, we had a case pop up in New York. That's a circulating vaccine-derived case. Nevertheless, it illustrates that polio virus can only be a plane ride away from us. I'll illustrate it in this way for you. A mouse looked through the crack in the farmhouse wall. And what does he see? He sees a mousetrap. Retreating to the farmyard, the mouse proclaimed this warning, "There's a mousetrap in the house! There's a mousetrap in the house!" And the chicken in a hunt and peck for grain said, "Well, Mr. Mouse, I can tell you this is a very grave concern to you, but I'm really quite busy here." And the pig sympathized, said, I'm so very sorry for you, Mr. Mouse. Be assured that you are in my prayers." And the cow said, Wow, Mr. Mouse, I'm so sorry for you, but that really doesn't affect me. And so the mouse returned to the house, head down and dejected, to face the mousetrap alone. That very night, the sound of a mousetrap catching its prey could be heard throughout the farmhouse. The farmer's wife goes to investigate. In the darkness, she did not see that it was the poisonous snake whose tail had been caught in the trap. The snake bit the farmer's wife, and the farmer rushed her to the hospital. And he later brought her home with a fever. Well, everyone knows, especially many of those who have a few years on them here, you treat a fever with what? Chicken noodle soup. So the farmer took his hatchet to the farmyard for the soup's main ingredient, the chicken. But his wife's illness continued, and so friends and neighbors came to sit around, to be with her, to comfort her. And to feed them, the farmer went out and butchered that pig. Now, the farmer's wife did not get well. In fact, she died. And so many people came to her funeral, the farmer had the cow slaughtered in order to feed all that came. So, moral of the story, the next time someone is facing a crisis, whether it's here, in our neighborhood, or around the world, remember, when one of us is threatened, all of us are at risk. Such is the case with polio. It's estimated that if we don't see this through until the end, 10 million new cases in the next 40 years. If we just tried to suppress it, said we've done what we could. And if you don't think so, if you don't think that it's a plane ride away, our own Centers for Disease Control indicates that only 1 in 20 of our children here in the United States is properly immunized. Other way around, sorry. 1 in 20 of our children here are opting out of immunizations. 1 in 20 of our children. We've had cases of measles and pertussis outbreaks here in the United States occurring right in our country. These diseases for which proper immunization is available. So pertussis and measles outbreaks indicates that we have a problem with our immunization schedules. Syria hadn't had a case of polio in 14 years. Then suddenly they had a polio outbreak after 14 years. A war had interrupted their polio immunization schedules. Polio loves unrest. 22 children under the age of 2 were affected because of that. Can you answer me this question? As a Rotarian, it's an important one. Isn't it true, Tim Mulcrone, that a polio vaccination can actually cause a case of paralytic polio in an individual? Isn't it true? Isn't it true? As a Rotarian, we have to tell the truth. It is possible. It is possible with the oral, but you have to drill down. Only with the oral polio vaccine, which is a weakened but live virus, and not in the individual, but it travels through their system into the sewage system, taints the water system, and we get herd immunity that way, actually in others. But in some cases, that vaccination can morph into a virulent form of polio virus that can cause a problem in another person. And that is what happened with the individual in New York that you read about. So, Tim, how frequently does that happen? About 625 cases per 2.5 billion. It's rare, but it does happen. And it doesn't happen with the injectable because the injectable is a dead virus vaccine. Remember I told you there's 2 vaccines. It's more expensive to deliver. And country by country, they go from the oral polio vaccine to the injectable vaccine, according to the World Health Organization recommendations and the decisions that are made in country. With the inactivated injectable, you only protects the individual. You don't get herd immunity the same way that you get with oral polio vaccine, which has been most effective at stopping the spread. Aren't immunizations linked to autism, Tim? No. But what was a concern about a particular preservative in an immunization not related to polio has morphed into a very broad anti-immunization campaign. And we'll talk more about that later, because I have a great story about anti-vaccination for you. Now, don't polio contributions do they go towards Paul Harris Fellowship? Yes, they do. The Rotary Foundation has a number of different areas you can give to, and they all apply to the Paul Harris Fellowship. The questions like that go on if you drill down, but as Rotarians, you should be aware of them. As you can see, as we're near the end, the questions get a little harder. The last bastion of the polio virus is hiding in the crevices of some very dismal and impoverished places in the world. And to get to it requires the commitment of an Olympian. We're up against some very tough adversaries. Tough adversaries. I want you to listen to their names. Fatigue. Keeping our energy up is a hard task after 35 years. How about vying against other noble but competing interests of Rotary? Not everybody understands that this is our priority, to eradicate polio in the world. We do a million other things. I do a million other things. I hosted my exchange student in my home from my club. He's from Chile. His name is Jose. I'm involved in a Kenya water project. I'm participating in a grant for a food rescue operation in Victoria. I do a million things. You do a million things. But I haven't forgotten that our number one effort in the world is eradicating polio. We also have some new and previously unimaginable foes. Previously unimaginable foes. Like 35 years ago, you could not imagine the myth of like you're here to sterilize our children. You couldn't imagine that. Anti-immunization movements. 40 years ago, that wasn't the thing. And the Taliban. Let's talk about the Taliban. They were an obstacle for us to get our vaccinations delivered in Afghanistan. As of November 8th, is that current enough news for you? As of November 8th last year, the Taliban is actually granting us access to 3 million new children that we never had access to before. As you remember, the Taliban took over in Afghanistan last year, and as of November 8th, they were not only delivering the vaccine to people that we couldn't reach before, but they're actually running security on some of those teams. The struggle to end polio reminds me of my climb up to the peak of Kilimanjaro. I did it. Hardest thing I've ever done in my life. After 3 days of climbing, I was doing pretty well at Kibo Hut, which is at 15,500 feet. And we slept briefly. Then at midnight, we began our 6.5-hour ascent to Gilman's Point, and then another 2.5 hours to Uhuru Peak. Anyone done it? 19,340 feet. About 4 hours into the ascent, I was facing fatigue, altitude sickness. Altitude sickness was not my enemy, as I witnessed many others being carried down and others getting sick. I needed a head game. I needed a plan. What could I do? I began counting my steps. 50 steps, little ones. Little ones. You're walking in a thing called screed. Remember that, Bob? Every step you take, you would lose a half a step. You're barely like making any progress at all. After 25 of those, 50 of those steps, then I started deep breathing. 25 deep breaths. Trying to fill my lungs with as much oxygen as I could, and then breathing it all out, squeezing it all out. And I'd do that 25 times, and then I would take another 50 steps. These became the smaller benchmarks for me to meet the next 4.5 hours to Uhuru Peak and on the entire route back to Kibo. Ending polio in the world is within sight, as Uhuru Peak was to me. Polio eradication is our calling, and it is our commitment. And our commitment is not yet fulfilled. And for people of integrity, like Rotarians, that means everything. What will our personal benchmarks be as we continue this fight until the end? I want to take you back, another little story, take you back to 1946. In the spring of that year, a 13-year-old boy and his 11-year-old sister were walking home to their Foley, Minnesota farm from school. It was about 1.5 miles. It was a beautiful day. They were best friends. They did all their chores together. He began talking excitedly about the tractor that was on order in 1946. It was a Farmall, a 1946 Farmall. It had been on order for quite some time. You see, since all U.S. resources were being dedicated to steel and to the war, all U.S. resources like steel were being dedicated to the war, the idea of getting a tractor made out of steel was a very lofty dream. Steel was in such demand that they were reducing the size of a bayonet on the end of a rifle from 16 inches down to 10 inches to save the 6 inches of steel for some other application. That's how much in demand it was. But now, a year after the war was ended, all things like tractors were now becoming available, and the tractor might come through. He couldn't stop talking about that tractor. His sister said he told his sister she would just love it. But a horrible foreboding feeling came over that 11-year-old girl. She didn't know or understand that she had a little gift of premonition. The more he talked about that tractor, the heavier her legs became. And she cried out, "Shut up, shut up. I hope we never get that tractor. Never want to see that tractor." And she walked home alone and sobbing as he ran off to the farm. Now, at the farm, John and Ida Carlin were busy with crops in the field and crops in the house. As was common in the days before penicillin, Marcel had died at age 2 of scarlet fever, and Johnny died at age 14 of rheumatic fever after having been in bed an entire year. Of the 11 children, 3 were off to war. 3 of their 11 were off to World War as part of mandatory service in those days, and 6 were still at home. Summer came with it, and so did a polio epidemic. 1946. Now, except for church, people were avoiding getting together for any kind of private events. Pools were closed. It was a very frightening time. Theaters were closed. No state fair in Minnesota in 1946. Then one Wednesday in August, the 13-year-old boy started feeling a little bit lousy. Everyone in the family had come through a sort of summer crud, so John and Ida didn't take him to the doctor. On Thursday, he was worse. But the tractor was supposed to be delivered that day. The boy said he was feeling fine. It wasn't true. It wasn't true. But there's no way he was going to leave that farm with the tractor about ready to arrive. The tractor did come, and the boy dragged himself out to it, climbed into the seat. His sister climbed up and stood next to him. The boy was too weak to start it, but he said he would teach her to drive it tomorrow. The next day, Friday, the boy was very ill. John and Ida took him to Doc Donaldson in Foley. He diagnosed it as polio. There was nothing that he could do, nothing that St. Cloud Hospital could do. Maybe take him to the University of Minnesota Hospital, who was working tirelessly on a cure, a possible cure. And that's where they went, by ambulance. His little sister was so scared. She and her brother had built a very crude fort in the oak tree across the driveway, and she climbed up there. It was very heavy with foliage at that time. She had never really prayed as hard as she did that day, that intensely, for the life of her brother. You know, they prayed for everything in those days. They prayed before meals. They prayed during storms. They prayed about the war for her brothers in the service, and they prayed for peace, and they prayed for her deceased brothers. They prayed constantly, but she never cried, prayed, and pleaded with God that hard before. And John and Ida came home with the ambulance, but without her brother that Friday afternoon to attend to chores. The next morning, the news arrived that her brother had died of polio. The young girl was absolutely devastated. Her brother's wake was in the living room of the farmhouse. People drove through the driveway with tears of condolence and waving, but they would not come in. They would not come into the house. The young girl, that young girl, her name is Ann. She is my mom. The 13-year-old boy, Tim, was my uncle. I am my mom's firstborn of 6 children, and she named me in memory of him. I asked her to tell me the details of Tim's story, the ones that I just recounted to you. And she did, and it made her cry. She lost him so many years ago, over 70 years ago, I suppose. She's the most emotionally strong and resilient person I know, and yet her pain is as raw now as it was then. I did not join Rotary for its polio eradication efforts. What a strange, strange twist of fate that I find myself bringing the news to you and other Rotarians of this amazing fight against polio that we are in. Polio is a very painful disease. 1 in 200 will be debilitated. 5 to 15% of those will die from polio. We're so close to securing the greatest victory over disease. The first was smallpox. Now this thing is about, I know you want me to talk about the money, Don. I can see it. It's $1 billion a year effort to get this done. So Bill and Melinda Gates give $1.2 billion. We've already given $1.2 billion since the beginning. We're going to see this thing through to the end, so it's $1 billion a year. But we have World Health Organization, Centers for Disease Control, UNICEF, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Oh, by the way, every government of every country in the world. We're going to get it done. Well, when are we going to get it done, Tim? Well, money-wise, it's about a $4.6 billion effort over the next 4 to 5 years. We're $2.6 billion funded right now. So that gives you an idea about the money. We have legions of willing workers. We're not alone in this fight. What an amazing team that is, right? To be the catalyst of this great global polio eradication initiative. This is just one area of Rotary in which you and Rotary's Foundation might make a difference in the world. I'm a street cop. This was my life. I believed that I was born to serve as a street cop, a very locally based life. My life would have been quite myopic had it not been for Rotary that opened up the world to me and told me that I could make a difference in the world. Do you remember the story of the starfish? Do you remember that one? It's a great story. You can make a difference. You can make a difference to that one. When we went to India in 2012 and we delivered 2 drops of that vaccine on the tongue of a child and knew that we had made a difference to that child, that does something to you. It was that week in 2012 that the Delhi paper carried the headline that India was being removed from the list of polio endemic countries. Do you think that made a difference to Tim Mulcrone to have been a part of that? To know that I played a small part on the world stage? It's been said that Rotary could be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for our work to eradicate polio. If that happens, I know I know that's the closest I'm ever getting to a Nobel Peace Prize. Not that that's a reason to keep going, but wow, that would be something. I want to share fully in that excitement, knowing I had taken a bit of my time, a bit of my treasure, a bit of my talent to participate in Rotary's #1 effort in the world. The Rotary Foundation is at the heart of all that we do, including polio eradication. The Rotary Foundation is and has been a remarkable steward of our money, and I hope you will consider it. Your district asks you to focus on two particular funds of the Rotary Foundation. One is annual programs. That's known as Every Rotarian Every Year. That's the tagline, at a rate of about $1 a day. This money is invested in the Rotary International for 3 years. 3 years it's held there. And then at the end of that, about half of it comes back to the district and then becomes known as district designated funds. That becomes the source of the grants. When we look to the district for grant money, that's where it comes from. The other request is that each club, from their fundraising efforts in a year, give to the polio fund of the Rotary Foundation at the rate of $1,500 a year. These are two separate asks, an individual ask and a club ask. These contributions also do qualify for Paul Harris Award and recognition, and I put some brochures out for you. More importantly, to know that we don't have to do this alone. I hope you will please share this information with your friends and your family. So easy now to throw it out there on social media, put it out on your LinkedIn, host a polio eradication fundraiser or any kind of fundraiser. It doesn't take much. Through our efforts, healthcare systems have been created that will live on beyond our polio eradication efforts. Health care initiatives around the world have been built because we endeavored to eradicate polio in the world. That's how I can tell you that we are sitting at about 30 cases. I get updates every week because of the disease monitoring that we have been able to establish in all around the world. And that, Dr. William Fogy of the Centers of Disease Control, former head, he said that improving healthcare around the world is positively correlated to peace. So in a way, you are also engaged in a peace initiative. Today, I've resigned myself to be forever in debt to Rotary for connecting me to the palpable knowledge that I can make a difference. In our busy and blessed lives, we can get going pretty well and be a little oblivious to the less fortunate on our increasingly smaller planet. I'm reminded of a commuter maybe driving down one of our busy roads here in Bloomington, concentrating on just what is ahead as we pass through a narrow corridor lined with cars, when suddenly a brick is thrown from between those cars and smashes into the commuter's car. The commuter slams on the brakes to take on whoever threw that brick, and he finds himself confronting a teenage boy standing over another boy who was tipped over in his wheelchair. And the boy explains, I'm so sorry, mister, but my brother needed help, and I just couldn't get anyone to stop. My fellow Rotarians, this is my brick. This is our legacy in the making. When our tarnished Rotary pins are found by our great-grandchildren, what will they be told that symbol represents? We must make certain that it is synonymous with an end to a disease called polio that had crippled and killed millions of children. And those children will say, wow, or whatever word they have that means wow. You will have thoroughly impressed them with your ability to eradicate polio in the world. I want to thank you for allowing me to share this time with you. The last 35 years, 37 years with you. I wish you well in your personal foundation giving decision, and Godspeed our goal of a polio-free world.
Could I have everybody in this room who has put those 2 drops on a child's tongue stand up? I think sometimes we forget that our own local members have been part of this around the world and physically been there to do that for other children. I also want to share that our club is one of those clubs that annually gives to the Polio Foundation as well as the Rotary Foundation. So congratulate yourselves. It's what we do. It's how we do things in very small ways, as I said, that make a gigantic impact. Tim will be around for questions. And thank you very much. Happy Thanksgiving. And we'll see you next week when Leo Lewis is here.